quadrants work? It's called
So when we're trying to figure out in what quadrant has these things, we need to know, first of all, from, I don't know, pre-K, that the quadrant system. So this is the first quadrant, here is the second quadrant, the third quadrant is down here, and the fourth quadrant is there. Okay, so there we go to start with. Now, so we want to know where is the sign negative and where is the cosine negative. So that's what it means to be less than 0, negative, and cosine is negative. So when we think about it, the sign is always a ratio of the y value to the r value. So y over r. And since we know that the radius can never be negative, this is telling us that the y value has to be negative. Cosine is a ratio of the x to the r, and once again, radius can never be negative. So this one is telling us that the x is negative. So we turn your brain on and we think, in what quadrant is the y value negative and the x value negative? And you should all know that that is quadrant 3, a negative x value and a negative y. So quadrant 3 is the quadrant where we're going to find the negative sign and a negative cosine value. Okay, since we're looking at it, here's 25. This is telling us that the x value is positive. Okay, so x is positive over here, so we're either talking about 1 or 4. Right, here's your y-axis. X is positive 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're talking about quadrants 1 and 4, but it also says the cotangent is positive. Now, cotangent is a ratio of the y value, x value to the y value. So x we already know is positive, and the whole entire thing is positive, which means y must be positive also. So that is only going to happen in quadrant 1, where the x and the y are both positive. So this is a quadrant 1 angle, where the cotangent and the cosine are both positive. So moving to 24, the secant. The secant is the reverse, or rather the reciprocal of the cosine, which means we're talking about the x values. So far we have x being positive, and that happens in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 4. But now over here we're told the cotangent is negative, and cotangent is a ratio of x over y. So we already know that x is positive and the whole thing is negative, which means, hopefully you're recognizing, that y must be negative. In order for the ratio to be negative, one of these two things has to be negative. One of them does. So in what quadrant do we have a positive x and a negative y? Well, that is the fourth quadrant. So IV quadrant is the answer. So we're just looking at the x and the y values, making it as simple as possible. Tangent, once again, is the y value over the x value. So we know that that is positive, and the cosecant is negative. Okay, cosecant goes with y. It's the inverse of the sine. So we have a negative y value. So this thing is negative. But the entire tangent has to be positive, which means both of these have to be negative, because a negative over a negative is a positive. And both y and negative, or rather y and x, are negative in the third quadrant. So this is a third quadrant angle. Okay, so when we're trying to decipher what quadrant we're looking at, think about the x and the y's that go with each of them to determine which one is positive and where.